letters spilled across the kitchen table like accusations. Dozens of them, yellowed with age, still sealed, still unread. Caroline's hand shook as she picked one up, then another, recognizing the handwriting she'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Her sister Ruth stood in the doorway, face drained to color, mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. The trunk she'd been packing for her move east sat open in the corner, and that's where Caroline had found 'em, wrapped in cloth at the very bottom, hidden beneath old quilts and photographs, buried like stolen gold. 15 years of letters, 15 years of silence she'd believed was his choice. Every envelope addressed to her in that careful script. Every one intercepted, hidden, kept from her by the person she'd trusted most in this world. Caroline's voice came out raw, strangled. How could Ruth have done this? How could she have watched Caroline grieve, watched her believe herself abandoned, watched her give up on love entirely, all while these letters sat hidden in her sister's trunk? Ruth's tears started then, but Caroline felt no sympathy, only rage, only the crushing weight of stolen years, stolen chances, stolen dreams that could never be reclaimed. Ruth tried to speak, to explain, but what explanation could possibly be enough? The truth was written across her guilty face clearer than any words. She'd wanted what Caroline had, and when she couldn't have it, she made sure Caroline couldn't have it either. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the years of pretending. Ruth had comforted Caroline through her heartbreak, had held her while she cried over a man who'd supposedly stopped writing, stopped caring, had looked her in the eye every single day, knowing she was the reason for that pain. And Caroline realized in that terrible moment that she'd never really known her sister at all. Tell me something true. If your own blood, the person who shared your childhood, your secrets, your home, stole your future, and let you believe the lie for 15 years, could you ever look at them the same way again? Would you search for reasons, for justifications, for some way to understand how envy could poison love that deep? Or would the betrayal be too complete, the wound too raw, the years too lost to ever forgive? Some betrayals come from strangers. Those are easy to accept because we expect the world to be cruel sometimes. But when the knife comes from family, from the one person who's supposed to protect you, that's when the wound goes deepest, because it doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your faith in everything you thought was true. Caroline stood at that crossroads now, surrounded by letters she was 15 years too late to read.
Caroline and Ruth had been inseparable growing up, two sides of the same coin. Caroline was the older by 3 years, bold, bright-eyed, full of dreams too big for their small frontier town. She wanted adventure, romance, a life that felt alive. Ruth was quieter, more careful, content with simple things. She loved her sister fiercely, but even as children, there was something else mixed in with that love, something darker that Ruth didn't have a name for yet. When Caroline was 21, Daniel Mercer rode into town. He was a surveyor working for the railroad company, temporarily stationed to map the land west of the settlement. Tall and kind, with an easy smile and eyes that saw Caroline in a way no one else ever had. He'd stop by the general store where she worked, making excuses to linger, until finally he worked up the courage to ask if she'd take a walk with him. Caroline fell hard and fast. Daniel was everything she'd dreamed about. Intelligent, ambitious, gentle. He listened when she talked about wanting more than this dusty town could offer. He understood her restlessness because he felt it too. They spent every spare moment together, walking the countryside, making plans, falling deeper in love with every sunset. Ruth watched it all unfold with a smile on her face and poison taking root in her heart. She tried to be happy for her sister, tried to ignore the way her stomach twisted every time she saw them together. But envy is a patient creature, and it fed on every small thing. The way Daniel looked at Caroline like she hung the moon, the way Caroline glowed with happiness Ruth had never felt, the way everyone assumed Caroline would have the better life simply because she always had. Ruth told herself it wasn't jealousy. She told herself she just worried about Caroline rushing into things. But late at night, alone in the room they shared, she'd lie awake imagining what it would feel like to be the one Daniel loved instead. After 6 months, Daniel's work was finished. He had to return east to report to the railroad company. But he promised Caroline he'd come back. He'd save money, make arrangements, and return to marry her within the year. They'd build a life together, maybe head west to California like she'd always dreamed. Caroline believed him completely. And for the first month after he left, her faith was rewarded. Letters arrived regularly, full of love and plans, and counting down the days until his return. She'd read them aloud to Ruth, sharing every word, never noticing the way her sister's jaw tightened or how her eyes went cold. Then one evening, Ruth offered to walk to the post office alone to save Caroline the trip after a long day at the store. Caroline thanked her, grateful for her sister's kindness. Ruth walked slowly back from the post office that day, Daniel's latest letter burning in her pocket. She stood at the fork in the road, one path home, one path to the creek, and made a choice that would destroy them both. She sat by the water and opened the letter, read his words of love meant for her sister, felt the unfairness of it all crash over her like a wave. Why did Caroline get everything? Why was Ruth always the one left behind, overlooked, forgotten? The letter was still in her hands when she made her decision. Instead of taking it home, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her dress, told Caroline that nothing had come that day, watched her sister's face fall with disappointment. It was supposed to be just once, just one letter kept back, one small rebellion against the unfairness of watching Caroline live the life Ruth wanted. But the next week, another letter came, then another. And each time, Ruth found herself walking to the creek instead of going home, adding another letter to the growing collection she kept hidden in an old hat box under her bed. Caroline started to worry, started to wonder why Daniel's letters had stopped. She wrote to him repeatedly, asking what was wrong, but Ruth made sure those letters never reached the post office either. She'd offer to mail them, then burn them behind the house when no one was looking. Weeks turned into months. Caroline's brightness dimmed. She'd stand at the window staring down the road, waiting for a rider who never came. She'd make excuses at first. He was busy, the mail was slow, something that delayed him. But slowly, the hope bled out of her eyes. Ruth watched her break and told herself it was for the best. Daniel wasn't right for Caroline anyway. Caroline would get over him. And maybe, eventually, Ruth could stop feeling guilty about the letters gathering dust in her hiding place. But Daniel's letters kept coming, month after month, year after year. At first they were confused, hurt, asking why Caroline had stopped writing, begging for an explanation. Then angry, assuming she'd found someone else or changed her mind. Then resigned, sad, accepting that whatever they'd had was over. Then finally, years later, they stopped coming altogether. Ruth hid them all, every single one. Caroline eventually stopped talking about Daniel, stopped standing at the window, stopped believing in the kind of love she'd felt so certain about. Something in her hardened, went quiet, like a light snuffed out. She kept working at the store, kept living her small life, but the dreams died. She rejected other suitors who came calling, unable to trust her heart to anyone after being abandoned so completely. Ruth stayed close, playing the devoted sister, offering comfort while carrying the guilt of what she'd done. The letters accumulated in her trunk. First the hat box, then bundles wrapped in string, then whole stacks that required a bigger hiding place. She couldn't bring herself to destroy them, but couldn't bear to look at them either. They were proof of her crime, her weakness, her terrible choice. 15 years passed. Caroline settled into spinsterhood, believing herself unlovable. Ruth never married either, too consumed by guilt to accept any man's affection. They lived together in their family home after their parents passed. Two sisters, bound by secrets only one of them knew. Then Ruth's aunt back east died and left her a small inheritance, enough to make a fresh start, move away, finally escape the constant reminder of what she'd done. She started packing, planning to leave the letters behind, maybe burn them before she went. But Caroline found them first. She'd been helping Ruth sort through old belongings when she knocked over the trunk, spilling its contents across the floor. And there they were, dozens of envelopes, all addressed to her, all sealed, all marked with dates spanning 15 years. The truth came crashing down like thunder.
Ruth stood in that doorway with nowhere left to hide, and the words finally came spilling out. She confessed everything. The envy that had eaten her alive, the first letter she'd kept, then the second, then all the rest. How she'd watched Caroline suffer and told herself it was justified somehow, that Caroline had already had too much happiness. How the guilt had poisoned her entire life, leaving her unable to love or be loved because she didn't deserve it. She'd convinced herself that too much time had passed, that confessing would only cause more pain, that keeping the secret was the kinder choice. But really, she'd just been protecting herself. Too cowardly to face what she'd done, too selfish to give Caroline back what she'd stolen. Ruth dropped to her knees, begging forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. She'd destroyed both their lives, Caroline's out of envy and her own out of guilt. 15 years wasted, 15 years that could never be recovered. Caroline stood frozen, letters clutched in her shaking hands. Part of her wanted to rage, to scream, to make Caroline feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused. But another part of her just felt empty, hollow, like she was looking at a stranger wearing her sister's face. She opened one of the letters with trembling fingers, then another. Daniel's words from 15 years ago, still fresh, still full of love and confusion and hurt. He'd waited for her, tried to reach her, eventually gave up, believing she'd abandoned him. The life they could have had enfolded in those pages like a ghost. Plans made, dreams shared, love freely given and never received. All of it stolen by envy masquerading as sisterhood. Caroline looked up at Ruth and realized something that changed everything. She couldn't forgive this. Not now. Maybe not ever. Some betrayals cut too deep, steal too much, destroy too completely to ever be made right. But she also realized that staying angry, nursing this wound for the rest of her life, would only let Ruth's betrayal keep stealing from her. She'd already lost 15 years. She wouldn't lose any more.
Caroline packed her own trunk that night, not to run away, but to finally chase the dreams she'd abandoned. She'd write to Daniel's last known address, though she had no idea if he'd still be there or if he'd even want to hear from her. She'd head west like she'd always planned, but this time on her own terms, for her own reasons. Before she left, she told Ruth something that would stay with both of them forever. Forgiveness wasn't something Ruth could earn or Caroline could give like a gift. It was something that might come with time or might never come at all. But either way, Caroline refused to let this betrayal define the rest of her life. Ruth watched her sister leave at dawn, carrying one small bag and 15 years of stolen letters. She never saw Caroline again. Years later, word filtered back through mutual acquaintances that Caroline had made it to California, that she'd found work, built a life, even found peace. Whether she ever reconnected with Daniel, no one knew. But she was free, finally, from the weight of wondering why she hadn't been enough. Ruth lived out her days alone, the guilt her only companion. She'd let envy poison the most important relationship in her life, and the lesson came too late to change anything. You can't steal someone else's happiness and expect your own to grow. Envy destroys the envious first, rotting them from the inside until there's nothing left but regret. But Caroline learned something too, something just as important. When betrayal tries to bury you, the only way to survive is to dig yourself out. Not for revenge, not even for closure, but because your life, your dreams, your happiness, your future is worth fighting for, no matter who tried to take it from you. Some wounds never fully heal. Some family bonds, once broken, can't be mended. But you get to choose whether that brokenness defines you or frees you. Caroline chose freedom, and that choice, late as it came, saved her life. In the end, those letters couldn't give Caroline back the years she'd lost, but they gave her back something more important, the truth. And with that truth came the strength to finally stop waiting for someone else's permission to live. Envy is a thief that steals from everyone it touches, the one who harbors it, the one who's targeted by it, and all the love that could have flourished if jealousy hadn't choked it out first. The frontier teaches us that some betrayals are too deep to forgive easily, but it also teaches us that holding on to bitterness only gives the betrayer more power over your story. Caroline chose to write a new ending. Sometimes that's the only justice we get. If this tale touched your heart, then don't write off just yet. There are more stories waiting beneath the western sun. Tales of love, betrayal, and lessons learned the hard way. Subscribe to Frontier Love Tales, where every story reminds us that love still rides, even across the roughest frontier.